Today, the lights are bright.
Line drive right field, base hit. South Carolina wins the College World Series.
The pressure is real.
Shot clock at 10. Murray against Davis. Lobs down low for Sharp, and he has a shot rejected by Murray Boyle. He just blocked the shot of a 7'5" human. Are you kidding me?
And the stories are bigger than the scoreboard.
And South Carolina has won the national championship.
From the biggest plays.
Up in the pocket, gonna run inside the 20, 10. Lenore Sellers going left side, 5. Touchdown, Carolina. Touchdown. Touchdown, Lenore Sellers.
To the toughest call.
In the pocket, rolling right side, throws underneath. Is the ball picked up?
Got it.
It is. The Gamecocks have got it on a turnover. They shut it down at Death Valley.
To the moments everybody will be talking about tomorrow morning.
Michigan at the 41. What a hit! Ball's free on the ground. South Carolina deserves to have it, and they do.
This is the podcast that brings you inside the game. Now, here's your host, Keith Allsep, and this is Gamecock Pod Live.
All right, let's.
I got you.
You got me?
Got you now. Yep.
All right, so Alex, football is in the air. I do apologize for the snafu with the microphone. 2 more Saturdays without college football, and 3 Saturdays from now, South Carolina will kick off the 2026 season at home against Kent State at 12:45 p.m. Alex, what is going on in Gamecock country? We have got a lot to discuss today as we talk about key position battles, positions of strength. Can Shane Beamer finally have a consistent offense? A lot of big questions. And Alex, thanks for being with us. How much sunscreen have you gone through so far?
A lot. I just carried it over from summer camp, though, so I had a ton left over. But we get to go out there for those practices. Unfortunately, we start inside during the stretching periods and all that, so limits our time in the heat as much as it possibly can. And those guys are out there practicing in that heat, so good luck to them. But we get a little bit of time in the AC, which is nice.
All right. So, tell us what the vibe has been like around the team. what the team looks like physically and what you have been able to observe so far in preseason camp. We have to make sure we call it that, because John Whittle says there is nothing about Columbia, South Carolina in August that says fall. And you hear it, fall camp, fall camp, fall camp. Well, mostly it's people falling out from the heat and the humidity. So we're just going to stick to preseason camp. So give us the latest on that.
Yeah, I think you sense a little bit of a quiet confidence around the team. You got a little bit of a sense of that in the summer from the guys at SEC Media Days, from with Beamer and Harbor and Sellers and Peyton Williams. Like, you got a little bit of a sense of that quiet confidence. But getting to talk to more of the players at the media day before they started practice last Friday, you really started to feel like there is a quiet confidence about this team. And you kind of understand why. You just with some of the key pieces that you're bringing back. I think there's just a sense of confidence there, and I think from a physical standpoint, you really have to like how this team looks. I think the offensive line looks a little bit different from last year's offensive line, but I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, I think it looks the way Randy Clements wants that room to look at certain positions, and I think that's something that stands out. You got some guys from a freshman class standpoint who are physical standouts already, and Noah Clark and Julian Walker. And I mean, Noah Clark, watching him do some of the bag drills and the way he can move his feet, like, he shouldn't be able to move like the way he moves at his size. Like, it's pretty incredible. And I was mentioning this to somebody yesterday. Like, it's pretty incredible to hear just the consistent talk that's been around him. And it's not just he's doing a really good job in practice. He's working his butt off and things like that. I mean, you're hearing just how much this guy stands out in these practices, and the players are just gushing over him. The coaches are. And then you add in a Darius Gray to that too, where, I mean, there's just been nothing but good stuff talked about that guy so far since he's arrived on campus. So I think from a physical standpoint, Caleb Herring's somebody that right there from a physical standpoint that's caught my attention. Julian Walker, another freshman that's physical that caught my attention. Xavier Currents. I think Brady Hunt was one guy maybe a little bit off the radar. I think he's taking a step forward from a physical standpoint. Noticed that one of the first days of practice, and I think just overall the team is a good first off the bus type of team. Like, there's multiple guys. I mean, you look at Bruce Feldman's freak list. You got 3 guys who can be first off the bus on that list right there. So I think from a physicality standpoint, that's not going to be an issue with this team.
No doubt. So I can't wait to see. Certainly, we're a weekend essentially to practices. So next question, got to be at the front of mind for Gamecock Nation. What is the very latest on the health status of Dylan Stewart and Jacarrius Peak?
Yeah, so the open practices we've been to, we haven't seen Jacarrius Peak out there, but saw Dylan Stewart out there. Now, he was off to the side, not doing the stretching or anything like that. Beamer has, stressed here in these recent press conferences that they're on track and progressing. I think the thing with Peak, like, you heard at SEC Media Days from Shane Beamer that he was doing some things in the weight room. He saw in running. So it feels like he's kind of moving along there. And I think Dylan Stewart is too. And I think there's just a sense, and it's just my opinion, like a sense of just being careful with those guys, just with how important they are to the team, and being just how many weeks you got still till the season really gets going underway. So I think I'm interested to see here this weekend about the scrimmage, if those guys were able to do anything. And I think really that next scrimmage next weekend, that's when you kind of want to see those guys out on the field and practice leading up to that scrimmage. And because I think with Peak, it's just going to be interesting. I think there's more of a sense, in my opinion, again, like if I was doing it, like to have him out there for getting a game rep standpoint, just from a chemistry standpoint with the offensive line, you want him out there communicating. But I also think he's an old enough player and experienced player where he can maybe just step in pretty quickly from that standpoint too. So not much from a latest update standpoint on timelines or things like that. I think that's also kind of being sorted out, and I think we'll get more of a clear answer here after that second scrimmage going into week 1.
All right, good stuff. Next up, by the way, a big shout out to Gamecock 247. you, Hale, Whittle, everybody absolutely gave readers the very best coverage from the Birdies with Beamer. So combining Birdies with Beamer, from talking with the coaching staff to Shane Beamer's press conference on Tuesday, the media availability with offensive and defensive players, what are some of the key takeaways from those media availabilities?
We'll start on the defensive line. Talking to Travian Robertson at Birdies with Beamer, like there's a confidence there and that depth and what they have in that room. And Travian Robertson, I don't think is going to come out and just say some of the things he's been able to say if he doesn't have confidence in some of the things that he has in that room. And I think it's got a good chance to be one of the deepest rooms on this team. And I mean, again, like the Noah Clark stuff, like saying how much of an impact he can make as a freshman, like that stood out to me. I think. I didn't talk to Stan Drayton at Birdies with Beaver, but hearing, just about how wanting somebody to take ownership of that room is something that catches my attention. And I think a lot of it, that can't just be, trying to motivate those guys to continue taking steps forward. Matt Fuller, who was, MVP of the spring offensively, continue to have him take those steps forward. That's something that's kind of caught my attention. And, I think, just D tackles, D ends, like I think Deion Barnes, is continuing to build depth in that at defensive end, at edge. I think he talked about, I thought something that when I was talking to him at Birdies with Beamer that caught my attention was, Caleb Herring mentioned himself in the spring, how good of a spring he had and how it was one of his best springs he's had as a college player. And then Deion Barnes told me when I was talking to him that he may have had even better summer too. So I think that's something you really like to hear from him, being able to take those steps, because he's going to be relied on with Dylan Stewart on the field or without Dylan Stewart on the field. That's guy that's going to be relied on. And I think you hear about just how advanced Julian Walker is at edge. That's something that's caught my attention. And, I thought, talking to Matthew Smiley, too, was really interesting, hearing what he had to say about the place kicker battle, because it's one now that, maybe a few years ago was probably under the radar for South Carolina fans. But I think now it's one that everybody's really paying attention to here, having these battles here these past few years. And I think it's one, too, where we saw them kicking some in these open practices. And I think the second day we saw them was a good day for them. Like they seemed – I don't know if I saw one miss. Like if there was a miss, there weren't many in that day during those stretches of field goals. So interesting to see just from there. But then also, talking to Matthew Smiley, kind of getting a sense of, is Nick Harbor going to continue doing kickoff return? Which I think is kind of an interesting under the radar question, just because I think a lot was going to go into it is like what his role is going to look like offensively. And I think there's some other guys there who can maybe be a little bit better there. I think Nick Harbor is that guy who we all see. He's a guy that's got to get going a little bit to get that speed going. And once he gets that speed going, you're not catching him. I think that can be a little bit hard to do on kickoff. Like I think he can still be a good kickoff returner, but you got some other guys there like a Sequel Patterson who could be one to keep an eye on there at that return spot. Some of those other guys, Jaquel Holman, Matthew Smiley mentioned to me talking to him, somebody when he watched the film last year, he liked some things he saw from him. So I think just off the bat from Birdies with Beamer and some of those events, there was a few things that caught my attention from the guys I talked to.
So I got to say, Nolan Hay, if he doesn't have a future in football past this year, he certainly could have a career in broadcasting. I thought he was phenomenal. To me, the two things that stand out from the player interviews is when they are asked about the freshmen, which earlier in the week, I've compared this freshman class to a couple of the greatest freshman classes from the Steve Spurrier era, 2007, 2009, and 2010. I'm not going to go through the list, but needless to say, there were a lot of NFL guys in those signing classes, including Stephen Garcia, as we continue to pray for him with his battle with cancer. But Alex, you look at this freshman class, and Shane Beamer, that was the first thing out of his mouth on Tuesday was just the maturity of this freshman class. And he wasn't just talking about Neff Jiwa because he's 20 years old. He's talking about the real football players that, have had high school careers, I mean, I have to say, and we'll save that for position battles, but this looks like a freshman class that they definitely hit on, from the highest ranked guys in the class to a couple of guys that you wouldn't have expected because of the players in those groups, Tristan Lewis and Saquel Patterson, just because of the depth at wide receiver that may be forcing their way into the conversation on the depth chart.
Yeah, looking back, I think we had some high hopes for this class coming into South Carolina that they were going to have a shot to make an impact. The impact, was it going to be like a special teams type of impact or in a rotation type of impact? Well, a few of these guys are pushing, I think, for some starting jobs potentially. I mean, I think defensive tackle is one, obviously with Noah Clark. I think being a starter may be a tough jump there, but I think he's going to have a shot in this rotation. And I mentioned it earlier, like just hearing how they talk about him. And again, it's not just, he's working really hard and things like that. It's like how impressed they are with how he moves and how he's played so far and run stopping and things like that. So he's one. Jazavian Currents, I always ask these guys at media days, like, who are some freshmen that are standing out? And Currents was right at top of that list. Like, he was one that was getting a lot of mentions, and like that's going to be a pretty fun battle to track, I think, in that safety spot this next few weeks. Because Shane Beamer was talking of David Busey yesterday too, saying that he's a guy that, or the other day, that saying that he's a guy that not enough people are talking about, and that makes sense too, just with his experience. And I just think some other then obviously Darius Gray too. Like you hear Shane Beamer talking about him, how impressed he's been with him. I think there's some other freshmen too to kind of keep an eye on. Sequel Patterson's one. That cornerback spot, like there's, the depth is going to be one of the questions for that secondary. And I think Kasi Barnes has a chance to be right there, third, maybe fourth. Like DeMarcus Leach, I think you could probably say could be that third cornerback right now. But Kasi Barnes could be a guy that, gets some rotation snaps in there because we need somebody to step up there. I think, looking at, obviously safety, you're going to have some guy, or Jazavian Currents there. Like there's going to be a lot of freshmen who I think you're going to see them on special teams, but they've made a pretty strong impression so far. Obviously, Julian Walker, with the depth at that spot, like he's going to probably get some, meaningful reps pretty early on. So I think, defensively, that's where you're going to see the most of the freshmen make their impact. Do the Sequel Patterson at wide receiver, is he able to work himself into the rotation? That's going to be something to watch. Like I think a lot of the freshman impact you're going to see is defensively, just because offensively, maybe outside of Darius Gray, they've got a lot of experience coming back on the roster.
No doubt. So let's jump into some position battles, and let's start on offense with that offensive line, because I think Darius Gray has kind of thrown a monkey wrench into everybody's depth chart. And on offense, you've just had to wad that sheet of paper up and throw it in the trash. And I don't know where he's going to play. A lot of it could come down to the health of Jacarrius Peak. Certainly from what I've been hearing, there's more optimism on his progress than Dylan Stewart, that he could be ready sooner. But let's start at center. I think coming out of spring, initially we thought, hey, this is Carter Miller's job. Certainly Nolan Hay has inserted himself into that spot. Offensive line coach Randy Clements has said ideally you'd like to have 4 or 5 guys that could snap the ball. Could Darius Gray factor in there? Could it be at left guard? But then you hear Shane Beamer talk about, how much Hank Purvis, how much weight he's lost, how he's reshaped his body, what a great summer he has had. And then there's the question of Shed Surratt. Where does he play? Would he be the left tackle if Peak is not ready? Would he be the right tackle, or could that be a spot Darius Gray could slide into, and then you could play Surratt at left guard, where I thought he may have played his best football last year. So what do you think on the offensive line and some of these position battles?
Yeah, I think a lot is going to revolve around Jacarrius Peak and when he gets back because, if he's out, that's going to be some moving pieces in there. And I think that's a good thing for South. Not a good thing that Jacarrius Peak would be out, but you have position flexibility with a lot of these other guys that you can help make up for Jacarrius Peak. Obviously, you won't Peak in the starting five lineup as quick as you can get. But, if Peak is out, I think, Shed Surratt's a guy that played some tackle last year and played it really well. Like, I think good chance you could see him playing tackle. The thing with Darius Gray that's interesting is like, he can almost play every spot on the offensive line. Like I think there's just a lot. I think this next week or so is where you're really going to learn who that starting five is going to be come week one. Because I think heading into that second scrimmage next week is really when you want to have that starting five locked in where they can build that chemistry and things like that. But there's a lot of different options where it feels like in years past there weren't as many position battles taking place, or one where you felt like it could either way it goes, you could see it working out in the position battles. And I mean, I think, Hank Purvis is a guy you heard a lot about in the spring. I think he's continued to do well at that guard spot. Like, I think left guard's going to be interesting to watch, see where that plays out. Could that be a Darius Gray? Could that be a Hank Purvis? Could Shed Surratt even get back into the guard conversation? Like, there's a lot of different moving pieces. Center is going to be interesting. I think that's a competition where they're all helping each other continue to get better. And I think hearing the emergence of Nolan Hay, I think is only going to continue to push those other guys in that battle. I think Koju Poku, seems to be pretty, that's the one you hear the most about being, pretty locked in. Like, I think that right guard spot, I think he's got a solid chance to have that right guard spot. But I think, a lot's just going to depend on when Jacarrius Peak comes back, because then that's when I think things kind of settle in and where you're not having to move some pieces around. But they just have so many guys who have that position flexibility that they can kind of make up for it.
So how about guys like Dane Arnett?
Yeah.
Where could he factor in? I mean, to me, it would seem like right tackle, but I definitely want your take on that.
That's where I could see right tackle would be the spot. Like, say if Shed Surratt's got to go play at left tackle, like I think you could see a Dane Arnett at a right tackle. Seth Smith's another guy who could play some tackle. Some of those, so that's kind of the two I would watch from a tackle standpoint. Outside of Jacarrius Peak and Shed Surratt, but I feel like Arnett at right tackle is a spot to keep an eye on.
All right, so maybe the deepest position group on offense is at the wide receiver position. South Carolina has, I believe, 14 scholarship wide receivers. So, how many? I mean, that's the biggest question is with the Kendall Briles offense, how much tempo is involved where they play with just one football, so there's no subbing? And then what are the formations like? How much 2 wide receiver, 3 wide receiver, 4 wide receiver? But if you say there's 2 outside guys and 1 slot guy, and you look at just breaking it down, let's say at 1 outside spot, Nitro Tuggle, Jordan Gidron, Jaden Gibson. Then in the slot, Jaden Sellers, Mazeo Bennett, Sequel Patterson. And then outside, you got Nick Harbor, DJ Black, and Malik Clark. That's 9 guys. I mean, how do you see that? I mean, I didn't mention Lex Cyrus. I didn't mention several other quality players. But just those 9 guys, there's been a lot of years South Carolina would have killed to have the size, the speed, and the talent and the depth at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, it's definitely a deep room. The one thing I want to see with that room, that's we won't have this answer until the season, is like who can take that next step and be those guys who are getting into that maybe 400, 500-yard receiver mark. So you're going to need a few guys to step up. And I think another interesting thing that's going to be able to watch with this offense is, with the tempo and not wanting to sub, like you have to make the most of your opportunities in these stretches, just because they're going to not want to sub to kind of continue to not let the defense sub. So I think the rotation is going to be interesting to watch. And I think, Jaden Gibson's going to be kind of an intriguing guy to hear about in camp, just because couldn't do much, obviously, in spring practice. And he's, I think, had some moments in preseason camp. And I think he's a guy that maybe he brings something to that room that it doesn't quite have, being in that 6'5" range. Obviously, Harper's in that range, but a different type of receiver. But Jaden Gibson's a guy that can go up and get it, kind of that third down possession, end zone type of threat that I think they could need or are going to need. And interesting to see if he can step up. But who from that second year guy steps up? Does Donovan Murphy able to take that next step? Can Jaden Sellers build on what he was able to do? That's going to be key to watch. And then Mazieu Bennett could be maybe the X factor for that wide receiver. Could he get back to that freshman year? It really kind of flash that he showed. So there's just so many different options in that room. And it is a deep room. I think they got a lot to work with. Does DJ Black, there's been some talk about him. And I mean, Lenore Sellers mentioning him as a guy to know for 2026. Like, what is he able to give them from a speed standpoint? Like, that's the one thing you can say about this room. Like, there's legit speed in this room, track speed. And I think now can they just put it all together? But there's definitely some guys who you kind of circle who, from what you've seen either from high school film or year one at South Carolina or early wherever else they may have played, like, you had the potential. You could see the potential in there. I mean, I remember when Nitro Tuggle committed and you kind of looked at his stats, and he was a guy that against the best teams had his best games. Like, I think his best game at Purdue came against Indiana, who had a really good defense. And he's got all the potential in the world, and really interested to see him and just how this wide receiver room develops, because overall is a deep room.
No doubt about it. So also for the first time since probably the Will Muschamp era, South Carolina has 5 scholarship running backs. And to me, this is another position battle here. Matthew Fuller, there's a lot of talk coming out of the spring about him potentially being the starter, but then you hear Stan Drayton talk about wanting to see that alpha step up and take charge of that room. Christian Clark comes from Texas, where he sat behind dudes all year until the bowl game when they opted out, and then he had over 100 yards rushing against a pretty good Michigan defense before that program fell apart and replaced their coaching staff. And then you got Jawarn Howell, who, when he got to play with the previous running back coach, looked like the best back on the team. And you got Isaiah Gustav, and then Jabri Coleman, who came from Penn State with Stan Drayton, who may have more talent and upside than anybody in that room.
Yeah, I think the guys that you're going to see get first or second in the rotation are going to be the guys who show the most consistency all around at running back in these preseason practices and scrimmages. Like, Stan Drayton has emphasized the importance of pass blocking, protecting Lenore Sellers, and I think that's a huge component going into what is going to go into who gets those snaps, as who not only can get it done in the run game, but who's going to be reliable in pass protection. Like, I think that's something that South kind of struggled with at that running back spot last year, from a pass protection standpoint. So who's going to be able to do that? Can Matt Fuller kind of build on that? Some of the flash he showed against LSU in the run and the touchdown run. Obviously, he had a really, really good spring, being named the offensive MVP. And so I'm interested to see kind of what I think he's got a chance to be that number one guy. But Christian Clark's the guy that Stan Drayton's talked about some of the work he's been able to do from a physical standpoint in the summer. Like, I thought seeing him in the spring and then seeing him what he was able to do in the summer and seeing him at media day and in these practices, like, from a physical standpoint, he's taken another step. Like, he looks like an SEC running back. So I think, I really liked what I saw from him in that bowl game. Some of the cuts he was able to make. I still think he was coming off that Achilles injury that he had that year before, where even when you're back and you're healthy and playing, I think it's something that it takes you a little bit kind of to get going. And, being behind some of the guys he was in that Texas running back room, I think, he made the most of his opportunities there. So got a chance there for that to be a potential 1-2 punch, but who's going to be third? Because that's going to be something that the rotations, they're going to have somebody step up in that third spot. Jawarn Howell has shown some of his athleticism and his explosion in his time. He could put it all together. And I thought Isaiah Augustov, a guy in the spring, I thought from a physical standpoint was one of the guys who had taken the biggest step from end of 25 going into spring practice. So then Jabri Coleman's a guy that Stan Drayton is familiar with. He already came in knowing what's expected of him every day in practice and things like that. So it's going to be, that's another one that's going to be one to watch, where what does the rotation kind of figure out who's going to end up being that alpha that they need to rise to the occasion. And And I think something else that's interesting talking to Stan Drayton is, like what does the rotation look like in game? And probably will be music to South Carolina fans' ears, but sounds like it's going to be one where whoever has the hot hand, that's who they're rolling with. And that's something that they haven't had these past few years in their rotation. So it's just going to be, there's a lot of, I think good questions in that room that need to be answered where, they have some talented options in there. Now it's just how it's all going to work out.
So obviously scheme was a major issue last season for South Carolina, but the run game was almost non-existent, which I thought really just put more pressure on Lenora Sellers, less pressure on defenses. You go back to 2024, and obviously I'm not expecting any of these guys to be Rocket Sanders, but when you go faster, when you have the most experienced offensive line in the country, having a run game and a guy like a Matt Fuller, like a Christian Clark, like the other guys you mentioned, be effective, how much does that help Lenora Sellers in the run game and the pass game? Because last year, defensive ends didn't have to worry about crashing down. Otherwise, Rocket Sanders is going 70 yards for a touchdown.
Yeah, I think last year defenses just kind of realized, like, hey, on these read option types of plays, the defensive ends, you just worry about Lenora Sellers. We'll take care of everything else on the interior with those running backs because they couldn't get a push up front and overall couldn't get anything in the run game. I think it's a massive thing for South Carolina. They can get something going in the run game to have somebody else for defense to account for in the run game other than Lenora Sellers. So that's only going to open up the passing game, but it's only going to open up these running lanes for Lenora Sellers where when he gets in the open, we all have seen what he can do in this in the past. So I think they need somebody to step up. And, I don't think it has to be an 1,000-yard type of season for any types of those running backs. I think it could just be guys who, one or two, maybe three guys who step up their games where just provide a legitimate threat besides Sellers where teams have to account for that running back up the middle or on the outside and not just sit there and wait on Sellers and let everybody else take care of the guy or the running backs on the inside.
All right, so let's talk about South Carolina's defensive ends, and let's go through two scenarios here. One is with Dylan Stewart, but let's start with what if Stewart is limited or is not ready to go? And so the one thing that caught my eye from media day and my ear was Clayton White in describing Kelby Collins as a big defensive end that can slide in and play defensive tackle. I think most of us have had him pegged as a guy that would probably play three technique, but with the uncertainty of Sellers and with run-heavy teams, what's the likelihood that you could see, in the absence of Dylan Stewart, Kelby Collins start at one defensive end, and then at the other end you would have Caleb Herring or Julian Walker?
I think from a starting perspective, I'm not sure. I think it could be a situational type of thing where we need a run-stopping defensive end in there. You can throw a Kelby Collins in there, and I think the depth of defensive tackle they're going to have at defensive tackle is going to help be able to do that. Where you maybe don't have to, you don't need Kelby Collins as much to be fresh or things like that. You can throw him out there as a defensive end spot to help in some run-stopping types of things, and he's got the skill set for where he can also get out the passer. So I think that's something where, maybe don't get talked about enough where that potential option is there because it was kind of a thought process, I think, even when he committed to South Carolina, that he could help there potentially at defensive end too in like an emergency type of situations or things like that. So, yeah, I think you want to try to roll with Julian Walker, Caleb Herring, Dylan Stewart there. But I think, and there could be in some situations where they get a little bit creative there and have, three D tackles, I guess, there on the D line and kind of help from a run stopping standpoint.
All right, so now let's say Stewart is healthy. He's an All American candidate, preseason Walter Camp All American, and other preseason All American honors. Certainly a lot of expectation. South Carolina, 3 guys on Bruce Feldman's freak list this year, and a guy in Jacarrius Peak who was on that list last year.
Yeah.
Including Nick Harbor, number 1 now for the 3rd year in a row. And I'm finally glad somebody said this guy is 6'6", because I still remember being scared to death standing on the sideline near the wide receivers when he was a freshman at the Kentucky game before the game. And he just towered over everybody and me. And I'm 6'3", 6'6", 240 pounds, a 6'10.5" wingspan. Then you've got Dylan Stewart, who evidently has been doing a lot of stuff from weight room and conditioning, clocked at 22 miles per hour, cut his body fat down from 6% to 5%, at 6'6", 250. And then you got Julian Walker, who's 6'6", 255, who is, with his dad's background as a strength coach with the high school program he comes from, and from being in school since January, he's an advanced guy. And then we still haven't mentioned Anthony Addison, Drew Collins, and we finally heard Quay Dodd's name as somebody to watch at player media availability this week.
Yeah, so it's, they're going to need some guys to step up in that room. And I think when you look past Dylan Stewart and Julian Walker and, and Caleb Herring in there, like Anthony Addison is really intriguing, because I think the thing you consistently hear with Anthony Addison is just about his motor and how hard he plays. Like you hear about, I think one of the players mentioned, like, some of these running backs will be, or wide receivers will be down the field, and you see Anthony Addison trying to chase them down the field. And I think with him is like, what's it going to look like from a run stopping standpoint? Like I think that's key for Deion Barnes. Like you got to be able to stop the run when you're in there. And I think that's something that last year South kind of struggled with a little bit out at the edge spot. So I think that's something they got to improve on. But without a doubt, you're going to need some of these guys. Kobe Sachi-Pra, you're going to need one of those guys. Some Jaquavius Dodd, some of these guys to step up and play some of those rotation roles, and Drew Collins too. So, I think everybody kind of has eyes on Julian Walker and Caleb Herring to see what they can do this year, and rightfully so. Like those guys are really, really good. And with Julian Walker, I think the question with him is going to be like just he's ready from a physical standpoint, but it takes a lot to be a freshman and play a defensive end when you have to run, stop, and get after the passer and things like that. Is he ready to go from that standpoint? And heard some positive things there about how far along from a technical standpoint he was in the spring. So I think that's certainly something that helps, and certainly something to track here coming up.
And one other guy we didn't mention, George Wilson, who they brought in last year. He was on schedule to play last year, and then he tore his ACL. Is he back 100%? And what role could you envision for him at defensive end?
I could see him being a third down pass rusher type of guy. Like we've seen in the past, maybe not as much last year, but I think in 24 you saw a little bit of where they would put a Brian Thomas on the outside of a Dylan Stewart or something like that, where you're having to account for a lot of speed there coming off the edge, and it makes it tough for tackles. And there could be a situation like that. Like I think if I'm circling a role for him, it's going to be kind of a third down pass rushing type of role, which I think he could be something that's really intriguing that he could thrive in.
No doubt. So at safety, we know Peyton Williams is going to be the starter barring injury at one safety spot. We mentioned off the top the David Busey and Jazavian Currents battle there. Corners are set as far as the starters. You mentioned DeMarcus Leach and Koski Barnes, Tristan Lewis is there backing up, also to back up Angelus Solomon. So a lot of guys there. At nickel, you got Gerald Kilgore and Quaysheed Scott battling out. How do you see that potentially playing out?
Yeah, I think that's a really tight battle right now that I think it's neck and neck. And that nickel spot is just so important in Clayton White's defense where I feel pretty confident in either direction that one goes. Quashid Scott's got, experience at that spot last year at Kentucky. He played primarily nickel in Brad White's defense at Kentucky. So I think, either one of those is going to be, I think it'd be fine to see kind of who wins that battle. Gerald Kilgore kind of showed some playmaking capabilities last year with, pick sixes and interceptions. So just, I think the one thing I'd watch with that spot is from a run stopping standpoint, because Jalen Kilgore being as physical as he was in that 6'3" kind of range, like he was really physical up on the line of scrimmage and run stopping, and you're going to need that from that nickel spot. And I do think that both of those guys from a coverage standpoint going to give them a lot. Now it's just what do they look like from a run stopping standpoint. I think both are very capable, just going to want to go out there and see it consistently.
No doubt. So obviously we've highlighted the defensive tackle position. I mean, the depth is just ridiculous for Travian Robertson. So here is really where the rubber meets the road is. I mean, I spoke to a source yesterday that just said, they may not be saying it, but this defense is loaded. And we've seen what Clayton White can do when he has talent, and even when last year, maybe not. I mean, we already know there's three starters, co-starters at linebacker. You're basically looking for a fourth and a fifth guy there. So Clayton White has been the only defensive coordinator Shane Beamer has had. You only have one change on the defensive coaching staff other than Torian Gray's role and salary, both increasing to keep him in Columbia. But this will be Shane Beamer's fourth offensive coordinator, and if you count Mike Bobo, who was initially named fifth offensive coordinator in 6 years, 4 officially. Is this the season South Carolina can finally have a consistent and productive season on offense?
Kendall Browell's track record says so. And I think it's going to come down to can they? It's going to come up front. Like that's where all eyes are going to be on the offensive line because of the recent struggles here. Like can that offensive line take that next step? You have so many new faces there, but Randy Clemens and Jason Smith, I think, are really good. Have done a really nice job with that room so far. Can they get that push forward offensively? And then I think just can what can Kendall Browse do for the Norris Southers? Can he get them back to that 2024 form and just let? I think everything you hear about Kendall Browse, and this everybody's heard this since he was hired. It's just he's going to design to the offense to whatever's best for Lenora Sellers and whatever the offense as a whole does best. I think you need some guys at running back and wide receiver to step up. Kind of be those legitimate SEC type of caliber players. Now I think the biggest but the biggest thing you want to see from this team going throughout the whole season is the health of it. You look at there are some rooms like linebacker, you have the 3 returners, but who's going to be that fourth linebacker? Like, that's a question that needs to be answered. They got some options there, but you're going to want to stay healthy at that linebacker spot. In the secondary, corner's a little bit inexperienced there, but can Cassie Barnes, DeMarcus Leach, or Tristan Lewis step up at that corner spot? So just with every team, health with every team is going to be something that is going to be a goal that you want to check off number 1 on the list. But I think there is a strong shot that consistency, because you think back to last year with Clayton White's defense, there were so many times where the defense they did have a few games where things got away from them, but so many games last year the defense did what it needed to do to give the offense a chance to be in the game or winning the game, but the offense just couldn't hold up at that side of the job. You feel like this year there's a strong chance that it'll be able to, just because of the track record Kendall Browse has. Now it's just, can the defense continue to take those steps that they have been taking? And can the offense, live up to some of the hype that's around it?
Alex, great stuff. I can't thank you enough for being with us. Great stuff you guys continue to do. And now in the YouTube and podcast space, tell us about that.
Yeah, just recorded the first episode this morning of Around the Roost with me, Hale McGranahan, John Whittle, and Kay Racine. Going to get that going here, and then obviously make sure to stay tuned to Gamecock 24/7. It's a fun time of the year right now. It's got preseason camp going on. First scrimmage is going to be really key for this team, and we'll have it all covered along with other sports. I mean, basketball got going in the Bahamas. Though before you know it, women's and men's basketball is going to get going for preseason camp, and baseball is going to be off to a really good start there under those Kevin Schnall and those guys. So make sure to stay tuned to Gamecock 24/7 because we'll have it all covered.
Alex, thanks as always. Be well, stay cool, and we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Always enjoy being on. Thanks for having me.
All right, that was Alex Jones. So we don't know who is catering this weekend scrimmage, but today's show is brought to you by the award-winning full-service catering company servicing the greater Charlotte, Fort Mill, Rock Hill, Lancaster area. That is Nana's Porch. Nana's Porch is your go-to for all your catering needs, whether it's a banquet, a wedding, a corporate event, a rehearsal dinner. Maybe it's a birthday, wedding, anniversary, or engagement celebration. Maybe it's a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly breakfast for your men's group, women's group at church, or in your office. Whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, Nana's Porch has got you covered. So go to the homepage, nanasporch.com. That's NANASPORCH.com. Get in touch with my good friend Chris Payne. Tell him the good folks at Gamecock Pod and Gamecock Pod Live sent you. You will love it. I guarantee it. They will help you customize your menu. They'll work with you and provide unparalleled customer service. So go to nanasporch.com and support this Gamecock-owned and operated business. All right, so we go from Alex Jones now to the pride of New England with Lulu Kesin from the Greenville News and the USA Today Network. Lulu, how's it going? How's your summer been? Have you been able to spend any time on the Cape? You look like you've gotten some sun and maybe some beach time.
I'm good. Yes, I was home for most of July, which was very nice. I don't get much time off in this gig at all, so it was very lovely to be home for a little bit.
Great. So great to have you with us here today. So before we dive into Gamecock women's basketball, let's talk about how former Gamecock players are performing in the WNBA. Tania Latson waived and then quickly picked up by Becky Hammond and the Las Vegas Aces. Let's talk about her, Raven Johnson, and Medina Okot, the rookies, and just what you've seen from them.
Yeah, obviously it's great to see Tania doing well. I think the Sparks, obviously that situation just wasn't going to work out. I didn't love the idea of forcing her to be a point guard. Obviously, I'm not going to say I know more than a WNBA coach, but just that sounded a little odd to me, especially for, such a strong wing guard and shooter and scorer. So I think Becky Hammond's obviously a great coach to learn from. Anytime you can be on a team with Asia Wilson and Chelsea Gray, like something's going right. I just thought in that game, obviously, yes, the Aces weren't, their big three, they were resting, and it was a loss ultimately. But I do think Tania just looked confident, and that's really all you want to see from a rookie who's had some, difficult time getting minutes is, when you're given the chance to perform, you perform, and 20 points is really impressive. And the way she did it, she was attacking the basket, and she hit a three the other night. I think she had like 5 points. I can't remember the final box score for the game after that, but I think she could be a useful player for the Aces in this playoff run. And, for Raven, the Indiana Fever, it's so up and down, right? They've, Kelsey Mitchell is going off and having this incredible year, which is great for my fantasy team that I have her on. But when you have Caitlin Clark and you have Ty Harris and you have, a lot of vets on that team at the guard position, a lot of people, questioned why Raven would be added just from a depth perspective. And in the beginning, I think Stephanie White did a good job getting her in there. And I think Raven performed well, but, Ty Harris playing a little bit better. Obviously, like I said, Kelsey Mitchell, her minutes have just gone down. But I think the thing for Raven is just to consistently, when you're given those minutes, take advantage of them. It's hard when you're used to playing, a decent chunk, and then all of a sudden, like mentally, I'm sure that's adjustment. But same with Medina. She's somebody that's been in and out of the starting lineup. I still think Carl Smesko is a good coach for her. A lot of the Atlanta Dream reporters that I know talk really highly about, the player relationships that he develops. And I think that she needs somebody that wants to invest in her long term. And, knock on wood, Atlanta seems like the organization and the coach that wants to do that.
So talking about the Aces, I thought that was the most Greg Popovich thing ever. You playing on national TV against the New York Liberty, and you rest your big three players. Certainly her time at San Antonio, I thought that was just the epitome of that. But Asia Wilson is having another MVP type of season. I mean, you hear talk about other players. Maybe there's Asia Wilson fatigue, but she's on pace to do something no other player has done as far as total points, total block shots in a season. She's already done it once and is on pace to do it 2 years in a row. I don't think anybody had ever done that prior to Asia Wilson. Talk about, obviously Aaliyah Boston, an all-star, Alicia Gray having one of her best seasons. I mean, 12 or 13 former Gamecocks in the WNBA, but as far as the playoffs and title contenders, how do you see the teams that feature players from South Carolina? How do you see that kind of shaking out?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The Aces have picked up some kind of head scratching losses here and there. Obviously getting, back in the win column against the Mystics. I think they play them again tomorrow. The Mystics are sort of this young team that everybody's talking about. But, I think Atlanta's a team that is sneaky. You never really know what they're going to be able to do in the playoffs. I think, like I said, it's funny. A lot of people on Twitter are really calling for Tanaya to really chip into Jewel Lloyd's, minutes, which I think would still, who knows if Becky Hammond's going to do that. I think Becky Hammond's a kind of coach that will do whatever it takes to win and in a smart way. And she'll feed the players, that are playing well. But with the MVP conversation with Asia, to go to your point, I think there are two kind of conversations that can be had in the sense of it's not a knock to Asia to compare her to, who's good right now and look at, who might have a chance if Asia wasn't having this career year. But then there's the other line that it can't be voter fatigue and you can't be searching for reasons why it's not Asia in the sense of if that's not just sort of hey, there is no reason it has to be type of thing. Olivia Miles is really fun to watch. Obviously, she has Rookie of the Year, in the bag, and she should. But Minnesota, I don't know. I know that there's no former Gamecocks on the links right now, but I think they're kind of the team to beat. But I think last year at the same time proved you can never really count out the Aces late in the season, and you never really know, who might get injured and what might happen in terms of, some of those top teams that are looking like they're going to take the title.
All right. So now to South Carolina on Friday afternoon. Major news. Not really a surprise to me. I don't think it really was a surprise to you either. But South Carolina announced that point guard Maddy McDaniel, who had already stepped away from the team, would be withdrawing from school and would not return. And so just your thoughts on that news, and then we can get into point guard options.
Yeah, obviously there's a difference in Ashlyn's post last year where she, made it very clear that she wanted to come back. And so once Maddy's was a little bit more discreet and I guess a little bit more open-ended, I sort of figured, okay, that's a return that probably won't happen, right? Things happen, right? It's college, it's 2026. I applaud anyone who's brave enough to value and to advocate and vocalize, the need to get help when things aren't great mentally. And that's a really important part. But I think this goes, I don't want to just say that it has to do with, being on a high level team, because I don't think it's unique to necessarily South Carolina. But, being a college athlete right now is really hard. I think a lot of people, I said this last summer I was on Jeff Pearlman's podcast, and he was asking me about, covering in the age of rev share. And I just think a lot of schools are irresponsible if they were so in favor of paying these kids, but not necessarily giving them the resources to mentally, handle what being paid means and what that comes with. And everyone's families are different, everybody has different backgrounds, everybody has different relationships with what being paid high amounts of money is in college. And I know Shane touched on this with a great interview with Claire from Watch Fox not long ago, but mentally there's a lot of things that are just more difficult right now. And so I don't say this in an insensitive way, but yeah, I'm not surprised anymore when these types of things happen, because it's a cause and effect of the ever-changing landscape of sports right now.
All right. So speaking of getting paid in rev share, that Maddy McDaniel's departure, that opens up that money. It opens up a roster spot. What are the chances that Dawn Staley adds maybe another foreign player who could be a point guard, or potentially one of these players who have a 5th year of eligibility, like Nasira Pryor, who was at Texas A&M, small in stature but big stats on the stat line. 16.3 points per game, 7 assists, 3.6 steals per game. Would you lean internal, or what would you put the odds on Dawn Staley adding back that 15th spot?
Yeah, I think when you have a coach that's, preparing for 15 for a couple months, I wouldn't be surprised at all if she thinks, I look at it a couple ways. One, if South Carolina, which I do believe they can, wins it all with the 14 that they have, that just speaks volumes, one, about her team, but two, about Dawn's coaching, right? I'm not suggesting that this is going to be an ego-driven decision where she's going to sit here and say, actually, I'm not going to win with a true point guard because that'll look even better for me. I'm not saying that, but I do think Dawn also is aware of what she has, and we can go into what she has after. But my money, if I had to bet on where that 15th player would come from, I would probably lean the more international route. I think, one, this stuff with the class of 2022 is still so confusing. I know a lot of coaches were telling some people at USA Today that they're fearful that it gets reversed, wins get revoked. There's just so many kind of layers there. Obviously, who you mentioned from A&M is a good option, but also your pool is still pretty small because they had to have already been in the transfer portal. I think I go like 60-40. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if she brings someone new in, because she hosted, Kamora Johnson. She wanted a backup point guard originally. Other side of me is like, it's Dawn. She'll figure it out. She'll be fine with the 14 that she has. But I would keep an eye on like any like good international prospects. Not saying they have to be in France just because the last two have been, but Dawn has connections everywhere, right? I've written a lot about, her overseas ties and things like that. And there might be somebody that she's been kind of interested in and it works out. I mean, at most, McDaniel had 3 years with the new 2022 thing, probably only 2. I mean, actually, she probably would have taken all 3. So either way, Dawn's thinking about the future. You're thinking about a backup point guard. I imagine that she wanted one for next year regardless, just because she didn't get one in the portal. So I wouldn't be surprised if that 15th player pops up.
Could this potentially open up a reclassification for a 2027 player, perhaps?
I wrote about that, and I was thinking about that. You see someone like Gigi Banks who has a visit scheduled. I do know I've been hearing Gigi's currently pretty high on Texas and LSU. Obviously, not saying things won't change, but just in the reality, I don't think it's a situation where, as of right now, what I know is Gigi's sitting there like, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to come to South Carolina right away type of thing. Chloe did it. Adele did it with the extra year added. Like, there's so many more benefits now to doing that. So I do think that's a possibility. And hey, that might kind of be, I'd be surprised. I personally wouldn't want to lose my senior year, if that makes sense. Like, I wouldn't, but if also it's a situation where a player is truthfully really hungry to start making money in college and wants to just get that going, and feels ready, then hey, Dawn might find the perfect match from this class.
All right, so let's talk about internally, which and I have no intel on this, but I would believe would be the most likely, simply because classes are getting ready to start. But South Carolina has still not released their official roster for the season. And so it was reported on the Rivals Network that Tessa Johnson, in summer workouts with obviously Maddy McDaniel not involved in those, had looked really good. Tessa grew up as a point guard, really became more of a wing guard at South Carolina. But as somebody that has handled the ball quite a bit during her time at South Carolina, you think about Dawn Staley loving the experience factor. Tessa has been an integral part of the program since her freshman season when they went 38-0, and she was the leading scorer in the Elite Eight game to get them to the Final Four, and then in the national championship game to win it all. And then you got Jersey Robinson, who is, if you watch the social media post and just how she's transformed her body and her playmaking ability. And then Agot McKeer. I mean, to me, those are the 3 most likely options. What are your thoughts on those 3 players?
Yeah, I might be in the minority here, but I also don't, everybody has their sources, things like that. But I'm probably of the belief that this job isn't Tessa's. I think all the points that you just made stand. And I think South Carolina's fine if Dawn does decide she wants Tessa, running the point. I just think when you have one of the best spot up 3-point shooters, you let her work off the ball, you let her, get back screens and kick out. I think it's sort of like, if it isn't, broke, don't fix it with Tessa a little bit. She's really, really thrived in that 2-3 spot. And she can honestly, Gotti can too, but she can play even closer to the basket. And she's just one of those, she reads defenses so well. And this isn't to say she can't do any of that at point. I look at it as this is Jersey and Agot's year. I think Jersey, from the way I've talked to Jersey, she carries herself in a really mature manner. She seems like she has a really great head on her shoulders, wise beyond her years. Well, will that translate to the court? I'm assuming. We don't know yet. There are going to be rookie mistakes, obviously, some freshman wrinkles, but I just think she's one of those players that could probably back up Gotti in that place. And I just think Gotti's a little bit better of a passer than Tessa. not necessarily decision maker, but just if we're talking like simple fundamental execution. I think Gotti's also somebody that just her vision, like everybody on South Carolina has to have good ball movement, but Gotti sees the floor incredibly well and is really fast. And so I think if you have a point, obviously anyone who's in this position isn't a true point guard in college right now, but all have experience. And I think Gotti sort of has that ability to push it at the pace that Dawn really liked that, Maddy and Raven did, but also is very comfortable with either her taking that shot or being the one to play make. And I think they're in a good situation. Like maybe this is a sort of biased take because it's the only team I cover in women's basketball, but like, I think anybody can follow suit right now. Like I think anyone can take Maddy's shoes, and that's not to say the fundamentals of a point guard aren't important. You're playing point for Dawn Staley. It's going to be hard, but I think they're in a much better place than maybe outside perception may suggest.
I mean, I agree. I'm so intrigued by Jersey Robinson simply because she's still 17. She won't turn 18 until October, but she's consistently played up in USA basketball 2 years in age, going back to when she was 14 and being the MVP in the 16 and unders, and then being 15 and being the MVP in the 17 and unders. And then last year playing with the 19 and unders. I just love Gotti as a bucket getter because the player she was in the NCAA tournament, that's the player that is just unstoppable because you saw her do it against the best teams in the country. And so I don't know. I mean, the one thing I would like to see is South Carolina have a formidable press offense that focused on passing the basketball to beat the press and use their size and their versatility in breaking the press, because that really gave them more problems last year than it should have.
Yeah. Oh, I think of that Texas game. They could not break that press. I mean, they won that game, but it was difficult. Yeah. I mean, I've written a lot of like roster breakdown stories in the last couple months. And like, I keep going back to like, this is a very flexible roster, right? You not only have size, but you have a 6'7" player who can shoot threes and dunk. So Dawn's options are endless. And I think that's kind of like that almost, I think flexible should be like the theme of the season, right? Like mentally you have to be able to play wherever is best that game. And I think in the SEC is only getting harder. It's not South Carolina. I mean, in some ways it's South Carolina versus half the SEC, but those games that, used to be Dawn could throw out the most kind of traditional starting five, like she might work through a couple different lineups. She might completely do things based on what the defense is throwing at her. She might start 5 people and call a timeout and put 2 minutes later and put 5 different ones in. I think this roster has to be able to adjust and adapt, and you have the materials too. And Dawn's, one of the top coaches in the world for a reason. And, her job right now is to sort through what is a good problem, but a difficult one, which is having a really loaded roster.
No doubt. And so on the point guard front and on dealing with probably the most talented and deepest roster that Dawn Staley has had at South Carolina, may come with the most difficult schedule in all of women's basketball. And it's going to start with trial by fire. Okay. I'm only listing the ranked opponents that we know. So South Carolina will open the season on November the 2nd in Paris. I hope to see you there. Against I'm going off ESPN's latest way too early preseason top 25. Number 21 Maryland on November 2nd. Then they come back home. They face number 9 North Carolina in Charlotte. Then on November 11th, they play number 5 Southern Cal, which I think that's probably way too low for them, in Greenville. So, I mean, that's just within the span of less than 10 days. You're facing 3 top 25 opponents and 2 top 10 opponents. And then also in November, you travel to Connecticut for the Hall of Fame showcase at the Mohegan Sun Arena and face number 2 UConn. So before Thanksgiving, that's 3 top 10 opponents. Let's just talk. I mean, that's just November that we know of right now.
Yeah, it is difficult. And another reason why I can't wait to talk to Dawn for the first time this season, because so many questions about the schedule, right? It's tricky when you have games that like carry over. You know, you take a Southern Cal, that was a home and home type of situation. Like the UConn, it was a multiple contract thing. Obviously, North Carolina restarting that with the Alley tip off. It's a difficult slate. I think I think it's going to pay off in the long run. I think the frustrating thing is South Carolina's reached a point, right, where a loss is like insane. People react to a loss like crazy. Like Dawn was not thinking twice about that Oklahoma loss last year. You know what happened? They learned from it. They didn't lose again until Texas, right? So I do think in the long run, this is really going to help the team. It's a lot harder. I think last year was probably it was very obvious that this last year's team needed time to gel. It needed time to get to where it played. And you don't want to play your best basketball in November, but in some ways this team kind of has to be on one pretty early. That isn't to say if they drop a couple of ranked opponents, you know, their life is over, but it's one of those things where you want to know how you can play from day one. And I will say I'm grateful that it's seeming like it's in Vegas in December, UCLA and Notre Dame, because I really didn't want to see Texas and Duke again when they're already playing Texas and Duke, like right in between both of those things.
No doubt. So you go to December the 3rd is at Duke in the SEC ACC Challenge. Then 3 days later, you play the team with the highest priced roster in women's college basketball, Oklahoma State. The first game, South Carolina will play at home against a ranked opponent, which will be at least their 6th ranked game with Audie Crooks and Liv McGill and company. And then, as you mentioned, finally, we got the other teams this morning. Shout out to Skim Milky, one of my favorite follows on
I love
X.
Skim. Skim is the best. Skim's the best.
Skim is definitely the best. So on December the 19th, you get a rematch of the national championship game, except UCLA lost all 6 players that played the majority of that game to the WNBA draft. They are ranked 13th. That will be in Las Vegas. Hope to see you there. And then the following night, December the 20th, South Carolina and 16th ranked Notre Dame with Hannah Hidalgo. That would just be interesting to see. We know the T-shirts who's guarding Tessa, but who can guard Hannah Hidalgo on this roster? That is at least 8 games before you get into the SEC portion of the schedule.
Yeah, and I'll add it stinks. I think, well, it doesn't stink. It's good basketball. Dawn's going to love it. But, you know, their home and home is Oklahoma, right? They don't have a cupcake home and home to deal with at all. Going back, I forgot to mention this about the November slate. Like, I think the Southern Cal game is like definition, you know, not to jinx it, but like great basketball in the sense that Dawn and Juju have such a great relationship. Dawn really likes what Lindsay's doing in LA with her team and wants to kind of see, you know, more women coaches continue to build these programs and bring in these players. And, you know, Dawn recruited a couple of these Southern Cal kids. And I think whenever, as Agat said, and as Dawn said about Gotti, like there's some competitiveness when you go against people in your recruiting class. And so I think that's just going to be a really fun game because it's, it's like almost when Stewie and Asia go against each other, it's like just like high level respect, right? It's two players that really love each other and love competing. And I think that's sort of maybe the vibe I get with these two teams. And Jazzy Davidson was so fun to watch last year. I look at this as like Notre Dame is the biggest test for this new point guard. Like Hannah Hidalgo is probably the last person a shaky point guard ever wants to go up against. And so, if that's Tessa, if that's Jersey, if that's a Gott, like that's a game that you're circling and that your ball movement and your ball protection has to be top tier, or that could completely change the slate of the game in that way.
So I think that could be a Jordan Lee matchup for South Carolina. So you go into SEC play. Hello, 2027. Let's go play Texas on January the 3rd, 8th ranked Texas on the 40 acres in Austin. I'll definitely be at that game with Addison. Then going by dates, number 24, Oklahoma, you'll play home and home. That's your second SEC ranked game on January the 14th. Then you've got number 17, Kentucky on January 31st. Number 11, Vandy on the road at Vanderbilt. Shea Ralph doing a great job with that program. This is really going to be a tough week because you will travel to Vanderbilt on February the 4th and then play Oklahoma for the second time on February the 8th. That's a tough week for sure. And then at number 15, Ole Miss on Valentine's Day, another Valentine's Day game for South Carolina. And then Malaysia Fulwiley will make her final appearance at Colonial Life Arena. LSU ranked 10th. They will come in on February 21st. 7 SEC ranked opponent games, and Texas 8, LSU 11, Vandy 12, Ole Miss 15, and Kentucky. I think they'll probably be better than 17th with their returners and the new players they have coming in. This is just and you play Oklahoma twice. This is just an incredibly daunting schedule. That's at least 15 teams that will be ranked in the top 25.
Absolutely. And Jordan Lee going home, 2 days, like pretty early into the SEC season. That's going to be both fun, difficult, all of the above. I think South Carolina has some solid home games, but, Ole Miss on the road, Vandy on the road, those are tricky. Those are teams that really got some key pieces in the portal, especially Ole Miss. So I'll be curious to see, I imagine those are close games, right? It's so hard to predict now. I'm the last. I don't enjoy necessarily like doing predictions in that way, but I do think that South Carolina needs to understand the weight of each game in the SEC this season, right? Not suggesting they ever played like one game was necessarily, easier than the other, but it's everything matters in a league that's so difficult, and it's, only going to make them better. And I think they have the right players to take advantage of that.
So Chloe Kitts and Ashlyn Watkins rejoining this roster coming off injuries. What's the expectation for them coming back after dealing with torn ACLs? Ashlyn, obviously a year and a half removed from that. Ironically, it happened at Mississippi State and Medina Ocott. But then Chloe, right before South Carolina goes to SEC Media Days in October, she tears her ACL. I think she will, according to Khadijah Sessions on a YouTube show, she should be 100% in September. And I think maybe one other player would be 100% in September, but everybody else, when the team comes back tomorrow, expected to be at 100. Kaylee Wynn, with this knee dislocation, but everybody else, including Adele Tack, expected to be 100% when the team returns tomorrow.
Yeah. Maybe, I mean, I've had Chloe back in that starting lineup for a bit now. Maybe I'm, rushing her a bit. It's weird. Like, I've seen things on Twitter where people are like, oh, I think Ashlyn will start over Chloe to give her time to get back from injury. And I understand that, but at the same time, like, Ashlyn hasn't played in a lot longer than Chloe has. Don't get me wrong. I do my research. I watch film, but it's funny. Like, Ashlyn is the player I haven't really seen play much since I took this job. I missed the 24 undefeated season, and then Ashlyn played 14 games my first year here. So it was kind of like, there's still like a bit of mystery, because I do think there's like a whole other level of like consistently watching a player in person. And so I'm excited for that. I'm excited to kind of get back to, knowing fully what she's able to do on this team. I think she's going to bring the fundamentals that lacked, in some ways. I think, to just be blunt, like, I think at times, like, Joyce wasn't really rebounding, right? Like, she'll tell you, she understood, like there was a point where Dawn clearly, like, something changed in that Vanderbilt game where she was like, okay, I have to attack the boards. And I mean, I cannot stress enough how big she was on the glass in the LSU semifinal of the tournament. Like, those, I think 12 rebounds, something like that, 8, I don't remember, but incredible work from what she did. And I think throughout the rest of the year, it really improved. So having a veteran presence like Chloe and like Ashlyn who want to attack the boards, from the jump, that's only going to make everyone else want to, right? It's contagious. I think Chloe is going to be an even better shooter based on what I saw. I think when you tear your ACL, like, I think from what I've heard, like, shooting is something that she was able to do, like, right away, or not right away, but like one of the early things that you're kind of able to do without like a whole ton of contact. I think she already had, I wrote an entire story about her mid-range. I think she's going to probably like develop that into a consistent 3-point shot too. I really think that if they don't miss a beat, the South Carolina team is going to be absolutely unstoppable. Like, I know that who they brought in is great and is worthy of the conversations that have been had, but like, don't underestimate, a Chloe Kesin and Ashlyn. And it's so easy to forget how good people are at basketball when you don't watch them play. Like, I'm victim of that. I had to go and watch Chloe film the first time I wrote about her, just because, like, you don't remember. I mean, I watched, like, this job is hard. You watch so many things. It's so easy to be like, oh my God, right. Chloe has this beautiful shooting form, and Chloe did this against Maryland and that against Duke. Like, I really think there's a lot riding on the season for her, and she's really excited. And I think I would argue the same for Ashlyn as well.
So great point on Joyce. I'm glad I'm not the only one that saw that. And so I'm going to use an analogy that you mostly hear from football coaches is iron sharpens iron.
Right.
And I thought at times Joyce would just not be fully engaged on defense and on the glass. And then in the fourth quarter, the focus would be there. I do think the Vandy game was kind of a turning point, but with the number of uber talented front court players, Ashlyn Watkins, Chloe Kitts, Joyce, Allie Turnabees, Adele Tack, who appears to be healthy. Can she stay healthy is the question. Kelsey Andrews is 100%. You signed probably the biggest freak athlete in the country in the Big O, Olivia Edwards. And the maturity. Now Joyce is a junior. The expectations are higher. to me, those combining factors says we're going to see a different Joyce Edwards this year from the jump.
For sure. And in some ways, I think Joyce had to put the scoring on her back a little bit last year. And
No doubt.
I think when you're a young player, right, you think, okay, I'm scoring 20, like someone else play defense. And I'm not suggesting that Joyce was, necessarily saying that. But I do think, there's learning curves, right? There's growth, there's maturity, all things that you just said. And she's a junior now, exactly like to that point. There's growing up that I think she probably already did this summer and is only going to continue to do. And I think when you have older players to lean on, that really helps, right? You want to be like them. She doesn't want to look like the younger kid. She wants to look like she's at the same level of Chloe and Ashlyn and Tessa in terms of age. And so I do think like that'll help. That, junior year is tough, right? We saw Tessa really take some leaps in some ways. And if there's more levels, which I think there are for Joyce to take, like, watch out, because she's somebody that practically averaged 20 points last season.
All right. So last thing, two players we've touched on, but to me, the most intriguing two players for this roster, a young player, well, really two young players, Jersey Robinson, who's 17, she'll turn 18 a month before, or less than a month before they kick off the season in Paris. 6'1", 6'2", incredibly gifted, signed by Nike at 15. At one point was the number one rated player in her class, a consensus top 5 player in the class. I don't think Dawn Staley's ever signed a guard like her. Mm-hmm. And so I'm intrigued, because you have the size, you have the playmaking ability, you have the bucket making ability. The spotlight's been on her for a very long time. How much does that change when there are 18,000 people in the stands? And then Allie Turnabees, because there's just never, and again, but just basing this on potential, I think the closest player we've seen to what maybe her ceiling could be is Breanna Stewart, but Allie's 6'7", not 6'4". What can her role be after coming in January, but now going through that strength conditioning and nutrition program, Molly Benetti? I just think the ceiling is so high for her. What kind of role could you project for her this year in a crowded front court?
Yeah, I think she's somebody that if she shows some improved strength, like I think around the rim is where they're really going to value her. Obviously, there's undeniable perks when you have a 6'7" player that wants to shoot threes, and she has that gorgeous mid-range jumper. But I'd kind of like to see her attack the basket a little bit more, like create through contact. I think she kind of leans away from contact a little bit. She's young. She has, like we said, like to go through that strength process with Molly. I think she is going to be somebody that Dawn kind of might rely on to be that traditional center, and that isn't limiting her. It's just simply like South Carolina might run into a team that's tallest player 6'2", tallest player 6'1", right? You can't not just punish defenses with drop off, right, passes there. So, she might be somebody that wants to play further out, but I think it has to, have that flexibility and that willingness to kind of adapt to what that defense is looking like that day. But I think game over if she's able, if she comes back and, this year, once we watch them play with a really strong presence around the rim, I would argue that was missing just a tad last year. Obviously, the decision-making has to speed up just a little bit, but that's something that'll get there. It's not easy to go from playing in France professionally with 35-year-olds to playing, with 19-year-olds in America. There's a difference there.
No doubt. Lulu, great stuff as always. Tell us what you've got coming up at the USA Today Network with the Greenville News.
Yeah, obviously a lot of football right now, some nice football stuff. I'm excited about this team, but I have some basketball stuff in the works too. I just filed a Dawn Staley sort of feature. You just look at the roster, kind of exactly what I was talking about, where like a loaded roster is a good problem, but it's a hard one. And how can she sort it? What does recent history show us? Don't know when that will run, but hopefully sometime next week. But yeah, a lot of football, trying to sprinkle in some women's basketball here and there too.
All right. Lulu, thank you so much. Great stuff as always. And we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Sure thing. Thank you for having me. Have a good one.
You too. All right. That was Lulu Kesin from the Greenville News. Great stuff as always. And so I thought a great show today. Appreciate all the fams jumping on there in the second half of the program. Gamecock Pod and Gamecock Pod Daily, Gamecock Pod Live. The morning after will be coming up. We are running a special sign up on September 1st. You won't be billed for an annual VIP subscription. You'll basically get 3 months for free. You won't be billed until October of 2027. You get a 2-month discount anytime you sign up. Sign up on the 1st, essentially 12 months for the price of 9. Monthly VIP subscription is essentially one trip to Starbucks. With that, you get all the podcasts, plus you get every Tuesday night, and we may move it up, potentially the Garnet and Black Town Hall, that and the morning after on Sundays during college football season are our two most popular features. They are VIP features, so you can find us at Gamecock Pod, patreon.com/Gamecock Pod. You can signing up is easy. We've had 5 new signups in the last week. And if you sign up for an annual membership, you get the podcast every single day, Monday through Friday. You get Sunday morning coffee talk in the off season. During football season, it is the morning after. And on Tuesday nights, you get an interactive Zoom call where everybody can participate. We record it for an hour, and then we go to overtime, which has lasted up to an hour, usually 30, 45 minutes of unrecorded talk where a lot of scoop is dropped. So join our growing Gamecock family. Patreon.com, patreon.com/Gamecock Pod. You can follow us on Twitter. Follow me at K Allsep. You can follow the show, follow the YouTube show, hit the like button, subscribe, and join us for what should be an exciting season of Gamecock football, baseball with Kevin Schnall, softball had the number 3 transfer portal class in the country, certainly expecting a bounce back year there. And then, I mean, is it national championship or bust for this South Carolina women's basketball team who have been to 7 straight Final Fours? Going to be ranked preseason number 1 in the country, and just a loaded roster as we discussed. So join us for all of that, and join us again next week when we go live on YouTube with Gamecock Pod Live. So special thanks to Alex Jones and Lulu Kesin for all their great stuff. You can also find us on the Believe Podcast Network, BLEAV.com. You can find us in the SEC section for Gamecock Pod Live in podcast form. So until next week, God bless, go Gamecocks, and stay cool out there. It's hot. Football is coming. Until next week, I am out of here.